Hello, can everyone hear me? I wasn't expecting the microphone. So I might get a bit shouty, might get a little bit further away. Let me know if you can't hear me. Hello, I'm Matt, and welcome to my talk, An Introduction to Making Apps for Apple Vision Pro Hack Reality. Firstly, thank you to everyone for being here. I really do appreciate you coming along. I hope it's a really helpful talk. Thank you to Leeds Mobile for organising this. I do appreciate it. Also, to echo the points there, thank you to Flutter for hosting. This building is incredible. The fact that I'm doing a talk here, a little bit surreal, a little bit nerding out about that. So thank you very much. Now, I'm fairly new to the scene here at Leeds Mobile, so you might be looking at me, oh, I have a clicker, and thinking, who is that guy? So, who am I? As I mentioned, I'm Matt. I am based in Nottingham, and I'm a contract senior iOS engineer. I am really passionate about giving back to the iOS community. I'm self-taught. I started quite a long time ago now, just giving it a Google and building it up from there. And now I'm really passionate about giving back and helping everyone grow. This is my first ever in-person talk at an event like this. Done quite a lot of stuff online, quite a lot of presentations. It's my first full-length talk here. I think I'm nervous. I think I'm excited. We'll see how it goes. However, I really want to grow this skill. So afterwards, I'm open to any feedback. Whether you think this talk is good, bad, or somewhere in the middle, I'm very open to that feedback. I really want to grow this skill. When I'm not doing tech stuff, a little random fact, I love a bit of UK ice hockey. My team is the Nottingham Panthers, based where I'm from. We're there pretty much every weekend during the season. It's towards the end of the season now, and in quite a dramatic sort of push to catch a playoff place. If you know anything about the Elite League, nowhere near as impressive as it sounds. We are bottom of the table, but hockey's fun. Now, I always like to start these talks with a big old bold statement. So I firmly believe the Vision Pro headset is the future of tech. A little bit controversial, I know, but I stand by it. You know what? You can quote me on it. So I'm really interested. I want to show just a quick vote by a show of hands. Who here agrees with this statement? Oh, thank you. Who disagrees? Who's unsure? All right, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I personally love the potential of AR apps, and I think Apple were the company to unlock that potential. But honestly, I think it's because I'm a huge Apple fanboy. For me, this started all the way back in 2008 when I got my first Apple product. It was a first generation iPod Touch. I got it for my 16th birthday. But anyone that doesn't remember this, it's pretty much an iPhone without the phone bit. This was before the App Store. It was pretty much a music player with a touchscreen. Sounds very basic now, but it was the bloody best, right? I was obsessed with this. From here on in, I absolutely loved Apple, loved everything they were putting out. The next couple of years, they went on to release the iPad, some new cool Macs, and even the App Store itself. Apple were taking markets and innovating them in new ways, uplifting that entire market. I was obsessed with Apple. I loved them. To me, they were untouchable. Everything they were doing was a slam dunk. That changed a little bit one sunny summer afternoon a couple of years later when Google hosted their Google I/O event. They announced some software, some new firmware, some new changes, and this. Google Project Glass, a pair of wearable AR glasses. It took apps and broke it out of devices and let it be in the environment around us. You could see your apps in front of you. You could see your contacts. You could check your emails, check your directions, see where you were going in our real life around us. This blew my mind. This was something straight out of sci-fi. This was a complete game changer. Unfortunately, Google discontinued this a few years later. Maybe it was too ahead of its time. Maybe it's just Google being Google. I don't know. But I never got my hands on a pair of Google glasses. However, it left me with one big feeling. So curious to what Apple could do in this space. If Apple explored this, what could they do to that market? From there on in, every Apple event, every dub, every keynote, I was desperate for Apple to make that announcement for a new product. Every single dub, everything. However, dubs came and dubs went. There was autumn keynotes, spring keynotes, surprise keynotes, Christmas keynotes. There was nothing. There was enhancements in frameworks for AR, which was great, but no products. Honestly, around about 2021, I was giving up hope. I was still predicting it. I was still tweeting like crazy about it. I didn't really believe it anymore, you know? However, and then, and finally, after over a decade of waiting, after all that hope, all that curiosity, finally, then. But let's not chat too much about the price. We're going to have a whinge about that at the drinks afterwards. Apple finally took their first steps into this space, and they started exploring spatial computing. They announced the Vision Pro headset and visionOS at WWDC 2023, and that device was released to America in January. Hopefully here fairly soon, please. But they finally got involved. This was the next generation of apps. It breaks out of devices, out of our phones, out of our iPads, into that space around us. Suddenly, the entire world is our canvas. This entire room is our screen. That's so exciting to me. It's interesting to me that Apple went down the route of saying spatial computing and really avoid terms like AR, VR, XR. There's a few different devices like this out now, but to me, the one thing they have in common is that all of these devices, to me, hack reality around us. Our software is now in that space around us. Our software is no longer just that really useful app on a phone. It's that thing that's part of our life. It's in our environment. As a user, that is so exciting to me. To be able to hack someone's life in a good way, obviously, hopefully anyway, that's really, really exciting to me. But as a developer, it goes another level. We get to make that software that can hack someone's reality, to change their life potentially. And doing this and making apps for the Vision Pro is actually a bit more easier than you might think. Now, hopefully, at this point, you're thinking, that sounds great. I kind of want to make an app for Vision Pro. But what do I need to make apps for Vision Pro? And you know what? I'm so hopeful you're thinking this. I'm going to quote you on it. So, you want to get up and running. Well, what do you need? Well, to start with, you need a Mac. Just like making apps for any Apple product, this is going to be your starting point. For Vision Pro, you need a Mac running an Apple Silicon processor. So if you have a Mac in the last 4 years or so, you're probably good to go. You'll also need Xcode 15.2 or above. Is this microphone okay? Is it all right? This comes with all the tools you need and the simulators that you will need. So grab that and you're probably good to go. Now, the one thing that you don't need is that you don't actually need a Vision Pro headset. And I'll tell you why in 1 second. However, if, like me, you want to go out of your way to kind of spend $3.5 grand on a headset you don't really need, then in my opinion, developing for Vision Pro is a great excuse if you want to buy it, and you kind of have to justify spending $3.5 grand. You didn't hear that from me. And the main reason why you don't need a Vision Pro headset is because Xcode comes with a built-in simulator to let you test your apps. You can run your apps here without actually having that device. Now, I've heard that this doesn't really do the actual headset justice, but to get up and running is more than good enough. This will let you see your app in its environment. Now, this simulator can be quite fiddly, especially compared to the iPhone or the iPad simulator, because we're now working in that 3D space. So it's definitely worth taking like half an hour of your time to really figure this out and get comfortable in this space. That time will pay itself back massively with dividends. Being able to interact with your apps in the same way a user would do on a headset is obviously critical. And there's some controls we can't do on this simulator. For example, we can't do hand tracking, but most controls we can do just using our cursor, our mouse, and our keyboard. For example, users can resize windows, so they can take any of your apps and make them as big or as small as they want in that space around them. And what they can do, and what we can do in the simulator, is grab that line, that one there, and we can drag that out with our cursor. In the same way that a user could do on an actual device, we can do that on a simulator. In a similar way, we can move our windows, move our apps around that space. This time using that line, the one underneath our app, and dragging it around. We can get the same control that a user would do to see our app in different positions. Now, by default, when we run our apps, we see it in this fairly lovely living room, to be fair to it. But the user can wear their headset anywhere they want. They can wear it in different places, different rooms, different environments. So being able to see our app in those different spaces is critical. Thankfully, the simulator has us covered there as well. What we do, we have this tool, which is that one there, and this will allow us to use 3 different environments at 2 different times a day. We can run our app in a kitchen, in a living room, or in a museum at daytime or nighttime to really see how the app would look. But just seeing our app here isn't enough. The user can wear that headset to do anything they want, right? They can walk around, stand up, sit down. We want to be able to move around that environment. Thankfully, the simulator has us covered there as well. And we have a range of controls to move around our environment. So working our way across this list of tools, this first one here will allow us to interact with our apps. We can actually use the app, tap the buttons, drag the progress bars to interact with our windows. The others allow us to move around the environment. This one here is like a look around tool. So you sort of use your head to look around, standing where you are. This one here will allow us to drag on a simulator to move left or right, or to stand up or sit down. We can orbit around a certain point, or we can zoom in or out to simulate walking around. As I said, they are quite fiddly at first, so really take that time to get used to them. Now, I think the most critical tool here is this one, the reset camera option. This will put you back in that starting position. When you're trying to simulate out to start with, this is going to be really important. It'll put you back in that starting point, especially when all you want to do is take a simple side step to the left, you have the wrong control selected, and now somehow you're upside down in your neighbor's front room. This will put you back at that starting point. So once you have your hardware, your software, and you're used to the simulator, you might now be thinking, awesome, what do I need to know then to start making Vision Pro apps? Which I'm gonna quickly take a sip. 2 handfuls, sorry. Slow down. Sorry. So what do you need to know then to start making apps for Vision Pro? Well, it comes down to 3 main concepts. These are your windows, volumes, and spaces. These are your 3 main building blocks when it comes to making apps for Vision Pro. It's the combination of these 3 tools that will make your app come to life for the Vision Pro headset. Let's break each of them down. Let's start with Windows. Windows are 2D views that, in a way, they're similar to your iOS or your iPad apps. But rather than being on a device in your hand, they're in that environment around you. So they're flat 2D windows. As we saw, the user can move and resize these windows. We can limit the size we want to, but the user has more control here compared to like an iPhone or an iPad. And the user can have multiple windows open at once, whether this is multiple windows from one app or multiple apps open at the same time. So that's the concept, but to really imagine this, what I want you to do is imagine that you've splashed that $3.5 grand on a headset and you're wearing it right now. I want you to imagine those windows around the room. You might have a window for notes in front of you. You might have emails over here somewhere. You might have Google over there. You might even have a crafty Twitter down here. You can have whatever apps you want, wherever you want in this room. They are your windows. The really important point here is not to undersell how powerful these are. Out of the 3 main tools, these are the most basic, but it doesn't mean they're basic. These are critical for Vision Pro apps. And you can make a really, really good app for Vision Pro using just Windows. So even though this probably is the most basic of the 3, don't sleep on how good these are. These are hugely, hugely powerful. And when it comes to making stuff for Vision Pro, Apple focuses on SwiftUI here. If you know your way around SwiftUI, you're going to get very far making Windows very, very quickly, which we'll look at more in 1 second. But actually 2D content. And one of the really cool things that the Vision Pro headset brings is that 3D element. This is where volumes come in. Volumes are like cubes. If Windows is a flat surface, volumes are cubes, and they will show 3D models. And like Windows, the user can have multiple volumes open at the same time. So you have multiple 3D models around their room. So keeping on that imaginary Vision Pro headset, what I would do is have a model in front when I was sort of telling that story about Apple announcing this Vision Pro headset. You could see it floating in front of us. You could interact with it, zoom, rotate it. It's a 3D model between us. That's where a volume would come into play. This makes use of Reality Kit, Apple's 3D model rendering framework, which we'll look at more in 1 second. Finally, we have spaces, and spaces go one step further. These are your fully immersive spaces. These can change the entire environment around us. So rather than being the model that's in front of us or that flat 2D view, this will be changing that room that you can see. Fully immersive content. So one last time, keeping that imaginary headset on, rather than just having your emails open here, rather than just having a model here, I would have taken you back to WWDC 2023 to see the actual announcement. I'll change that environment around you. So not just a model, the actual space around you. This makes use of Reality Kit and AR Kit. Our spaces are very, very cool. However, I have 45 minutes for this talk. We won't look too much into spaces today. We'll look at the others, but go home and give that a Google. Very, very cool stuff there. It's the mixture of these three concepts that will make your Vision Pro app come to life. And you haven't got to use just one, and you haven't got to use all of them. You could use just Windows if you wanted to, or just volumes if you wanted to, or Windows and volumes in your own space. It's your own combination of these three tools, and it's up to you to unlock your idea. So we are now cooking with what we know. So hopefully you're thinking, this is starting to make sense then. How do we get up and doing something? How do we work with these windows? Well, I need to be smooth with that drink, don't I? Simply knowing SwiftUI will get you so far with making Windows for Vision Pro. I think we are in a really cool time as iOS developers. Back in the day, we'd have no very different sets of tools to work with different devices. SwiftUI is obviously one set of code, one set of UI for different devices. And I think sometimes we take it for granted until we see how easy it is to get up and running for working on a brand new device like the Vision Pro. So to show an example, here's two apps that I made for Vision Pro. One of them is a basic timer for a hackathon event, and one of them is a football scores app showing live scores. I wanted two different examples, one very simple, one a little bit more complicated. I also know we're in a Flutter building with a lot of sports stuff, so I wanted to get the football reference in there. These look pretty cool for Vision Pro, but at the core of it, this is just SwiftUI. That timer is just a VStack with an image, a text object, and a button. If I was making this for iOS, it would have been the exact same code for the UI. And the app down there for the football scores, it's more complicated, but again, it's the exact same UI code that I would have run. It's just a navigation split view with a list and a grid. My architecture was the exact same for making it for iOS. The way I was getting the scores down to show, again, the exact same as what I've done for iOS. You can go so far just with SwiftUI code. You can use UIKit, but Apple very much say use SwiftUI. I tried to look into using UIKit for Vision Pro, but Figma have updated a new kind of package called UIKit for Vision Pro. So you search it, you just get Figma results. Makes your research a lot more difficult. But Apple very much say go down the SwiftUI route. But obviously, you need to make some changes to your SwiftUI code to make your app really belong on this headset. So, for example, one of the most obvious and most striking differences here is it just looks different, right? This looks very different to an iOS app. And the big thing is that app style. Apple want us to use this glass effect. So this background here is glassy. It's a little bit transparent. It's a bit reflective in ways. This is because they want their apps to feel like they're part of the environment. They don't want apps to really break that illusion. You should still be in the room that you're in, but just with apps around you. They want these apps to feel like they're part of your room. The big golden rule here is, if you can avoid it, not to use big, dominating, intense colors. For example, my time out here, if I was having a bit of a caffeine rush and I looked at that, I mean, you know what? I want to make it blue. It kind of breaks the illusion a little bit. It stands out far too much. That really shouldn't be in this kitchen area. This version here, it sort of blends in. That one there is a bit of an eyesore. It's not out of place because it's ugly. It's out of place because it's a dominating color. We get this background by default. So if we just don't set a background color, we get this glassy effect. In the same way on iOS for iPad, if you don't have a background color, it's white in light mode or black in dark mode. By default, we get this glassy effect. So no real code changes, but one to bear in mind for your designs. However, one important thing to remember is when it comes to colors, not using bright, bold, dominating colors certainly doesn't mean don't use colors in any way. You can still use colors. It's just about how you use them. Let's jump back to that timer app. Here, I have my start button. In this app, there's also a pause button and a stop button. Makes a lot of sense being green, orange, and red. It's really good for UX to let the user know what that button is without even really seeing it or reading that text. In this case, that color isn't too dominating. It's fairly restricted on the view, but it just looks out of place. And you're always going to sort of get this. Any color will look quite extreme in contrast to a glassy background. But SwiftUI has us covered here. And I don't know how well this is going to show on the screen. You might have to trust me on this. So this here, for the button, I'm using tint and color.green. But we can have, oh, it's a little bit different. We can have a glassy version of this color. It's a bit duller in a way, but it sort of blends more in that glassy background. And for this, all we're doing is taking our color, using green still, this time working with a secondary property. Just like that, we're now using colors suitable for our Vision Pro apps. These are tiny, tiny changes that will go so far with making your apps feel like they belong on the Vision Pro. But it's not all just about tiny changes and really enhancing your apps. We do have more tools that we can start to use. For example, we have ornaments. Now that we have this infinite space around us as our screen that we can sort of play with, we can really make use of it. And this is where ornaments come in. As windows are no longer limited to a certain device size, we can actually have content outside of our windows. This example here will show that. In the Live Football Score app, I now have a favorite button above the window outside that window space. It's showing a very critical control, but isn't taking up space when we can be showing information. These additional controls are what are called ornaments. And this lets us keep the focus on essential information while still giving users those really important controls. When it comes to ornaments, there's three main different versions we need to know about. The most common one that you'll probably see is the tab bar. For context, the tab bar on an iOS app is normally that bar at the bottom of your screen where you can jump to like very important parts of your app. On Vision Pro, it's a little bit different. It's over here on the left. It's attached to the window, but it's separate. It's an ornament. If it was to move the window around, it will move with it. It's still part of the window, just not in that content. By default, this will only show the icons, but if you were to move your cursor on there, or on an actual device just to look at it, it will extend out to show those tab names. So this is probably the most common example of an ornament you're going to see in Vision Pro. When it comes to the code for this, in SwiftUI, sorry if this gets a bit intense code, this is exactly what you'd expect. It's the same code that you would do for a tab bar in SwiftUI for iOS. It's the exact same code. It's a tab view, two different screens with a tab item. By default, we get that as an ornament in Vision Pro. But we can go a step further with this, and we can have our own custom control. We can work with a toolbar. So for context, on an iOS app, the toolbar is only a bit at the top of the screen. You might have like a plus button in there for your contacts, for example. And this sits down here on Vision Pro. It will sit underneath as an ornament. And there we have any sort of control we want. And again, it's exactly what you would expect from SwiftUI. It's a toolbar with a toolbar item with the button that I want. Again, the exact same thing for SwiftUI you might expect. The only thing that's changed is the placement. Now we are using bottom ornament, so exclusively available for Vision Pro. And that'll make use of that ornament. But what if we don't want it underneath the window? What if we want to put it anywhere that we fancy? Well, we can go one step further with custom ornaments. And we can put controls anywhere we fancy around the actual window itself. So as I mentioned, this is the example I showed. I now have my favorites button for this football league sat above the window. Again, if you move that window around, this will move with it. It's still part of the window. To do this, we make use of a brand new modifier in SwiftUI called ornament. And here, all I've done is wrapped a new button in this in the same way you would do with a toolbar. And I've attached this to the scene in a top trailing position, the top right of the window. And just like that, we now have all this access to ornaments. And you get a lot of control around this new tool to make your app really belong on the Vision Pro. And we can go even further with Windows. As I mentioned, we now have that infinite space to work rather than just a screen size. And we can have multiple windows within our app. This is very, I think, perfect for the Vision Pro and what it offers. We can quickly and easily break information out to new views and new windows to really enhance that user experience. We use multiple windows to really offer more content in our app. Now, I know like the Mac is quite good at doing this. The iPad tried, but it's really janky. I think the Vision Pro is very good at doing this. So let's take an example. Let's jump back to, where is it? There it is, the Football Scores app. I might be keeping an eye on a few scores here. Maybe I want to keep an eye out on the Liverpool score, the Brighton score, for example. But if I jump to another league, I'm going to lose this information. Or if I move to another app, I might again lose this information. So what I could do is break this information out into a new window. So we could show more info, but here I kept it to the scores. And just like so, I now have multiple windows in my app. These are independent windows. I can move these around. I can make them bigger or smaller independently. I can dismiss them. I can get rid of our main window and jump to another app to really take the space there. And this, again, is, I think, surprisingly straightforward when it comes to working with SwiftUI. What it would do in the very base level of our app, we set up a brand new window group. So a bit of information about the windows we want to show effectively. And what I'm going to do here is say when I want to display a brand new game data, so an object for a football game, then show a game card, that little window that you just saw showing the score. Then anywhere in the app, I can make use of this environment object called open window, and I can simply call through to it. Here, I have it wrapped in a button where I'm going to pass an item to that open window environment object. So this thing here is this thing here. And I'm going to pass to it a game data object. This will trickle back down the flow and open a brand new window. In just a few lines of code, we now have all that access to working with multiple windows. One more thing to bear in mind when it comes to working with windows, and this is to do with the starting size of your window. Like I said, users can make them bigger or smaller, but having that starting size correct is critical. Let's have one last look at that basic hackathon timer I had. It's a small app. It suits a small window. If a user sees this, they sort of know what to expect. They sort of know how it should behave. They can make it bigger if they want to, but it should look like that. Now imagine you open this app up and it looks like that. Right, it looks weird, something's gone wrong, looks super wafty. That's asking for a 1-star review on the App Store. Having this starting size correct is critical. And this is as simple as a one-liner. When we set up our window group, so the information around our windows, we can give it a default size, passing in a standard frame, or working with real-life measurements. So now that our apps are in the real world, we can work with measurements such as meters. So here, I'm saying it either be 450 and 165 as my window, or be 50 centimeters by 30 centimeters. For these measurements, there's quite a lot of options. We can use centimeters, inches, meters. I think miles is on there. I don't know who's using miles, but if you are, let's chat. That's a cool idea. But yeah, there's a lot of good options in there. With those tips, you should be in a great position to get up and running with 2D content for Vision Pro. However, it's pretty cool, right? Get you a certain way. But you might be thinking, great, but what about working with 3D objects? And that's a great question, so thank you for asking that. Well, when it comes to working with 3D objects, as I mentioned, it's down to using volumes. Volumes were the cubes for 3D models. This, again, works very nicely with SwiftUI. And it's a brand new tool, a brand new view called Reality View. And this will work with some Reality Kit content to draw and render that 3D model in your app. Now, this uses a lot of stuff from Reality Kit. And if you've not really worked with that much, it's a very, very powerful framework. Not only does it render your 3D models, but it does a lot with lighting, with shadows, to make your model really belong in the space it is. It's not just plonking that model there, it's making that model belong there. When it comes to working with 3D models, we make use of Reality Composer Pro, and we get access to this straight from Xcode. And what this will do is let us inspect our 3D model. It's a little bit like a storyboard in a way, where you can sort of see it on there and interact with it, but it's for 3D models. Here we can see that model, we can change the position, rotation, scale. We can see animation, sounds attached to it, get full control over this 3D model. And we can import our own 3D models into this. When we work with this, we work with a file format called USDZ, which I always get the letters the wrong way around in. And that stands for the Universal Scene Description zip file. This is it's a mouthful, isn't it? That is a file format for 3D models. It was developed by Apple and Pixar to be a really optimized way of compressing everything for a 3D model down. Perfect for mobile devices, perfect for Vision Pro. It sounds complicated, it's just a zip folder for all the stuff that you need for your 3D model. Your models, your textures, your animations, your everything for that 3D model. So we can drag these files into our project and use them. Now, a really good question is, where on earth do you get USDZ files from? It's not as simple as a PNG or a JPEG, which you can have a look on Google and sort of nick them. Where do you go about getting these sort of files from? Well, we have some good options. Apple actually provide us with a fairly good range of 3D models to work with to sort of experiment. Straight through Apple, we can download a range of models, import them in, they have animations, they look good, and it's a great starting point. But chances are, if you're making something to show it off on social media or to even release, you don't really want to use the stuff that Apple provide. There's websites out there, such as Sketchfab, which have a range of models for us to use. Now, I know poker stars are in the building. I did a lot of football stuff earlier on, so this one is for them. And searching on here, I found some models to do with poker. They have models for everything. Some are free, some you have to pay for, but it's a really, really good range of models. We can get these, we can download them and drag them into our project. So say, for example, I wanted to use these poker chips. I could download it, drag it into Reality Composer Pro and see my model in there. One thing to bear in mind is whenever I download these models, they tend to be huge, not file size huge, physically massive. So the scale here is, and I quote, 0.001. Okay, so one to bear in mind. I don't know why they're huge, but they're huge. But once we have it in there and we polish it off and it looks like how we want it to look, we are then in a good place to show this in our app. We can make use of that reality view, where all we can do is say what we want to load. In this case, it's called scene. I was meaning to change that to poker chips, but this case it's called scene, and we can add it to our app. It's 5 lines of code, 2 of them are brackets. Right, so it's very easy to get up and running with simply showing these models. Sure, this is obviously just scratching the surface. There's a lot we can do to interact with these models, but just to show them, it's as simple as that. Now, one thing to bear in mind, and one thing that really, really threw me, is that we can actually show 3D models with this in a window. We can take a flat 2D view and show 3D models. Doesn't make sense to me either, but it will look like this, the 3D model coming out of a window. You might want that, but chances are you just want to actually show that model. So what we can do is go back to our window group and we can change our window style to say, hey, work as a volume. Get rid of that window, work as a volume. Then, we nearly got there without any issues. Then what we would do is see the model without the window. So here now I have my gigantic poker chips on my coffee table. This is how I imagine coming back from a casino one day after winning big at poker. I'm not sure I know what winning the poker actually looks like. But we know, imagine, the bigger they are, the better you are, right? Didn't even cash them in, just took them home. And just with that, we can now add 3D models to our app. And with those tips, you should now be in a position where you know how to get set up and running with that simulator. You know about the 3 main concepts: windows, volumes, and spaces. You know how to make use of SwiftUI to work with Windows, and you know how to use 3D models in your app. You should now be in a great place to start making your own Vision Pro apps. Now, for one last time, hopefully now you're thinking, Matt, that was an all right introduction. I put great in the quote ambitious. That was an all right introduction. How can I follow you on social media? Before I open the questions, you can scan the thing, follow me on the bits. And that is my talk about introduction to Vision Pro apps. Thank you very much. So on. Yes. Can you do this? If you did want to ask on the Slido, it's also there with a social link. There we go.
Thank you. That was really good. It's kind of inspired me to have a play around with it this weekend as well.
Nice.
I'm kind of curious. Was it when SwiftUI was first released and I had to play with it? There's a lot of swearing at Xcode. Did you have this problem when you first started developing for the Vision Pro?
I have that issue with everything I ever develop. But I think, like I said, SwiftUI goes so far, and there's obviously teething issues with any new sort of technology and any sort of new device. There will be sort of bumps in the road. Like, for example, that window on the back of my 3D model really sort of threw me before I have to realize it has to be a volume to get rid of that window behind the poker chips. But it's all just part of the fun in a way, right? There's issues. It certainly might not be as easy as it looks, but I think it's surprisingly straightforward. I think if you spend a weekend playing with it, you'll go pretty far.
Cheers. Anybody for a microphone?
Thanks for that, Matt. It's good stuff. An education for a guy who knows nothing about tech. I just wanted to ask the audience, really, does anybody develop for Vision Pro and have the headset? Is there a gap between what you do on a Mac with a simulator and what you might actually do on a headset? Anybody got one?
If you do have a headset, we're going to be best friends real quick. Does anyone have one? Surprise everyone. Yay.
Thank you.
Is anyone planning on buying one when they come here?
I might get the Apple Vision SE because that'll be cheaper.
It will somehow still be 3.5 inches on
Yeah,
that screen and the worst to work with.
I'll go for a question from Slido now. So I quote, I normally have about 10,727,292 windows open and the dock/multiple windows contained on my Mac. Is there a similar concept to stopping me getting whiplash?
In terms of looking around at all the windows.
Well, luckily, Anthony's put his name against this. So do you want to elaborate on that?
I can't imagine if I was using it as a functional device. I just get the talk louder.
Yeah, cool.
I can't see how I could do it day to day and find. How would I find everything? Is there not a dock?
Yeah, it's a really fair point. So I don't think there is a dock. Like I don't have a headset, so hopefully I did have one to tell you a direct answer, but not that I've seen. And I think one of the things that people were sort of missing is that concept of a desktop space, and even just like users on the device. So like you would just go in and you have one space. You can't even log in and log out, for example. So, but with like DubDub coming up and surely a visionOS 2, maybe they're the sort of thing they'd be added in. So maybe the actual OS is fairly basic for now, but maybe, yeah, still the start of it, right?
You were talking earlier when we were stood over there, about how you can place windows all over the place. Yeah. Honestly, I imagine if after a day, it would look like the galaxy in my world. If I just, I'll chuck that over there. I'd spend all day finding the best window.
Yeah, I can imagine it being a problem. I think from our chat earlier on, someone a while ago tweeted saying that they opened a window and they couldn't find it in their house. And it was like in their conservatory and had to walk around to find that documentation, which is kind of hilarious. So maybe it's a little bit of self-control on not opening too many windows for now. Yeah, I'll be the exact same. I've got like 9 windows open, 9 desktops with different windows on this. So I feel that pain already.
Luke, is I first ask a question? Yeah. I'd not had a Vision Pro myself. Something that one of the podcasters that's online at the moment, I think it was Marco Arment who does Overcast. The one thing he said he learned from actually having a Vision Pro was that everything he'd done in Xcode before then was complete shit. So he says, I just got to throw it all away and start again. Do you think that there's something that, I mean, obviously what you've done is great, but once you get a actual Vision Pro, what do you think? Oh, yeah, is there something you think might be different that you'll need to do? I don't know.
So do you mean like the apps he had made for Vision Pro, he looked at in a different way?
I mean, he's already got an app that he's had for years, and he was starting to learn how to use it for, to change it for Vision Pro. And what he was doing just didn't seem to work, he said. So once I got the actual unit, he thought, I've got to completely change how this is working. Now, I should have paid more attention to what he was saying, but I just wondered whether you thought, oh, yeah, I can see that, yes, this kind of works, but there might be change. I don't know, maybe once you get your hands on one, you'll suddenly think, oh, yeah, there's something a lot different you need to think about the way you do things. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think the main point like that I've sort of heard about is to do with font sizes. So you sort of look at it on your screen and it looks tiny, but then it's in front of you and it's 5 meters long, and it just looks completely different. So I think having that headset would be ideal. But if it's that trade-off between spending $3.5 grand and giving it a go, I think it's definitely a good starting point. Like ideally, you would have one, but I don't think it's a blocker to not have one.
Okay, yeah.
It's just the UX issue, right? We haven't had this type of user experience, so everybody's got to learn a new way of doing it.
I also think in a certain way it's similar to like iOS simulators. You saw it looks good on a simulator, but then you have to try it out and the button's too small to tap or it doesn't quite feel right. And running that on a simulator and device is important. But if you had to, just that simulator would be good enough. So I think it's a very similar concept there.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's running through the Mac.
Do you remember Google Cardboard, where you could slot your phone in and you have VR that way? How Apple considered doing that as a simulator?
I hope they do.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've not heard anything like that, but it's a really good idea, right? If we all have this device already that can
Mhm.
simulate it a little bit better, it's a really good shout. I've not heard anything like that, but
Okay.
let's pitch it to Apple. Let's make it happen. So I was chatting to someone a while. Is that for your own room? Do you say for the webcam? I come over to you. So I think not that I've heard of. I know someone tried to do something with webcams for hand tracking. It always got quite involved pretty quick. They had like a Python script running to track their hands, to translate that into the simulator. So there's ways around it, but not that I've seen. So maybe it's somewhere out there in the deep dark web, but it's not baked into Xcode.
Yeah, I've just got a question. How, because obviously you think this is like the next best thing. How do you see it being used? You know, because I guess I'm a bit cynical and I think like we all spend so much time on our phones and like it's quite nice to have that disconnect. But do you think this will come in and like replace the need for a phone and a laptop, and you'll go on this if you need to like make a call or work or something like that?
Yeah, so I quite a big believer that it will replace our phones and laptops eventually. I think we're a long way from that. I don't think this device in this generation is that. I don't think we can get to that stage without this device. I think it's a really, really important step. I think right now it's pretty better for content creators. Like you have your Xcode window massive, you can sort of see your content around you. I think it is still missing that really killer app for users. I think it will eventually get there. I think that swing will happen between working for content creators to being more mass market. Like I always sort of look at devices and think like, would my family use it? Like my parents, for example, they don't really know what they're doing. I hope they don't watch this recording, but they can sort of use they sort of use an iPhone enough for certain bits. But I would never see them using this right now. In 5 years, maybe, but I think right now, people like us in this room, it's more of a fit for us. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I think I quite like having a disconnect, you know, not constantly having notifications flash up. And yeah, I quite like just being able to put my phone in another room. And I just sort of wonder, you know, in 5 years' time, if everyone starts using it and you're living with other people and you're walking around and they think you're looking at them. And, you know, I know at the moment it's absolutely huge, but I don't know. I guess it'll be quite interesting to see how it all pans out.
Nice.
Cheers. Thank you. Just a question on how you found like compile times and file sizes. Like, do I have more time to scroll on my phone between waiting for the app to build? Now it's in a 3D space.
You've always got time to scroll on your phone, it's right. I personally didn't find any real difference. I think like, in terms of like compared to the iOS apps I work on, they're probably not as complicated. Probably the most complicated was that the football app with the live scores, and again, it was fairly basic. But I didn't see any kind of real hit on compile times. I think it probably depends on what laptop you're running as well, right? So I've kind of got like a 2023 MacBook Pro that I use it for. This one here sort of struggles with it a little bit. But that one, it does fly, but it's kind of built to fly in that sort of environment, I guess. So but in terms of like comparisons to iOS apps, again, I would say it's quicker, but just probably because compared to that app size. But I think it probably does depend on what you're doing.
Cool, thank you.
Cheers, thank you. Great talk. I got like 2 questions that sort of linked. So I've got the microphone in my hand. I've lost my questions.
Yes, to the microphone, right?
It's weird. Have you seen that like on Twitter, this has like really exploded, like with people just developing like ridiculous things? And then like the second part of my question is, has there been like one example of something that someone's built and you've been like, whoa, that's absolutely, I couldn't have thought of that, and that's executed really, really well?
Cool. So I think there's a few good examples of really interesting concepts. I think the one that comes to mind is someone made like a subtitle app. So sort of position it under someone's face and sort of turn what they're saying in real time into subtitles. I sort of worked in that space a little bit in the past, and see someone go and do that properly for the Vision Pro is really exciting. I mean, that links quite nicely into my whole like hack reality concept where you're changing someone's life by having subtitles onto their face. So I think things like that is really interesting. In terms of anything that's sort of like really blown me away, maybe it does come down to like the actual spaces of putting someone on the moon, for example, to watch a movie, or on the moon to work in Xcode if you really fancy getting somewhere different. I think those things are very interesting to me. But I think at the core, like I am just a fanboy for this sort of stuff. You know, everything does look really exciting to me. And I think it's a case of I've been waiting for it for so long that anything is shiny and new and novelty. I don't know if that will wear off, but to me right now, anything does look really cool. But how about you? Is anything you sort of seen that looks really, really cool? No? Oh.
No, not really seen anything. So it's like, oh god, it looks really cool, like a calculator app or something. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of having like just windows in front of you is a novelty in itself, right? Even like with that football scores app, breaking the scores out into little windows is so basic. But when I first put that together, it looked really cool. I was tweeting that straight away because it just looked really kind of impressive. So basic, but because it's new, it just looks cooler in my opinion. And again, it's really interesting to sort of see how that will wear off in like 5 years. I think in terms of the apps now, you look at like iPhone, for example, we went through years of like fart apps and drinking a beer on your phone apps. And we might be in that sort of generation now of Vision Pro. And we need to get through these to get to the really cool stuff in a couple of years. So I think we're still in that very kind of early fart app generation, if you will. A fart app for Vision Pro. Nice.
Hi, Matt. Thanks very much. That was a great talk. Just, I was like, one of the ideas that kind of excites me is the kind of idea of having like shared windows and volumes that potentially like we're in Flutter's office here, maybe they could have stuff on the columns, you know, like, I don't know, schedules for what events are coming up this week, or maybe like on the side of buildings, advertising. So every street could be like Times Square, or like, I don't know, in your house, you could have messages on the fridge that your partner can pick up. Like, is that a thing yet? Is that like, you know, is that something that Apple have talked about? Like,
so it's currently not a thing in terms of that shared window that we could both see, for example. There's a thing called the shared space, which is where all your apps could run, which I think you read, you're like, oh, it will be that. But I don't think there's any concept yet of if we both had a headset on, we'd both see a window here. But again, with WWDC coming up in June, I really hope they're the sort of thing to add it in. I think one of my concerns there is they sort of go down the share play route where we both people sort of watching a video at the same time, which would be a very like diluted, limited version of doing that. So I hope they don't just stop at that sort of concept. I hope they can go all in where we could see that volume in front of us with that headset model I mentioned earlier on. Because currently it'd be there for me, but for no one else. So I'll be chatting about it and no one can see it. It'd be weird. But hopefully that, I think to me, that's a really big next step for it.
can I squeeze one more question? I know that I realize that like this is very much kind of like you know, Apple's ecosystem, and that's what this talk's been about. But is there technologies there that would basically allow you to target the Apple Vision Pro as well as perhaps like the Meta Quest and all the other kind of headsets that are out there? And
so not that I've seen them. I think it's very native at the moment. If React Native or Flutter was to come along and offer that, I think it would be a big step. But again, not something that I've seen, not something I've looked into too much. You can make apps for multiple Apple devices. So you can have it for iOS and for Vision Pro, just sort of wrap some bits and I can do like if statements, pretty much say if it's iPhone, do this thing, if Vision Pro, do that thing. But in terms of like Apple and Android, I haven't seen anything like that. But if we're already kind of at the point of hybrid apps, then it might make sense that we're that next step in the future.
cool, thanks.
Thank you. We've got a few more on Slido and then we'll wrap up. So when should you add a button as an ornament versus embedding it directly into a window in line with the content?
So I think it really comes down to design and UX, right? I think it's one of those, to me, like if it should be on a toolbar. So for example, you'll add a contact. It's important, it's needed, but it's not really directly linked to that content. A button for that timer, for example, is directly linked to that content. So to me, it would make too much sense to be an ornament. But I don't think either approach is wrong. It just comes down to what looks better and feels better. So I think, like personally, I always go for the custom ornaments. I like having things at the top of my window. Maybe I'm just too much embedded into iOS where they normally are sat on a toolbar, and down the bottom, just forget they're there, even if I've coded it in. So I think it's down to UX, right? I personally go for ornaments when it's needed, but not directly linked to that content. If that makes sense.
Thank you. I think we'll have to make this the last question. So,
we can chat about the drinks more. We can chat about it more.
if you can be terse, Tim, which is unlikely, you can ask a question. Is that okay? If we were lucky enough to see Steve Jobs release the Vision Pro, what do you think Apple would have done differently?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I don't know. I kind of think maybe it might not have happened if Steve Jobs was still there sort of running it. It's obviously hard to sort of know and hard to sort of know. I think, yeah, I don't know. Let me have a think about that one. I'll get back to whoever that was. It's a good question. Hell of a question. A little Vision Pro clip to your pocket. Microphones will be there as well. Thank you.